Welcome to Muted in Medicine, the podcast where we break the silence on the untold stories and pressing issues within the healthcare profession. Join us as we dive deep into topics that often linger in the shadows of medical corridors and are not discussed in conferences, meetings, social gatherings, and in the hallways. They are often hiding. From navigating errors and facing litigation to the often overlooked realm of mental health among healthcare professionals. Through candid conversations and storytelling, we aim to amplify the voices and shed light on challenges that resonate across the medical landscape. So grab your stethoscope and a cup of coffee and tune in as we uncover the layers of complexity in the world of healthcare that are so muted, yet so profoundly impactful. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Muted in Medicine podcast. My name is Saba Fatima, and I'll be your host for this podcast. I'm a pediatrician with a passion for helping healthcare professionals facing secondary trauma at work and healthcare, which often they're unprepared to face, and spreading more awareness about it. And with this podcast, we hope to discuss some of the most silenced topics in medicine that are often not out in the open. In this episode, we're diving into a topic that doesn't get nearly enough attention: financial literacy in healthcare. Why aren't healthcare providers and trainees encouraged to learn more about money management? Does it go against the altruistic nature of the profession? And why does it feel like academics are left behind when it comes to earning potential? Why are some fields, including pediatrics, orphaned in terms of compensation? And what are some of the gender biases that still exist to date? Today, we'll explore some of the unspoken financial pressures in medicine and how they affect healthcare workers at all stages of their careers, including debt, and perhaps learn some pointers to cultivate financial wellness in this field. To discuss this with me today, I have Dr. Jimmy Turner. Dr. Turner is an associate professor of anesthesiology at Wake Forest, founder of the Physician Philosopher, and CEO of Money Meets Medicine, Disability Insurance. Dr. Turner is also host of the Money Meets Medicine podcast and author of both the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance and his second book, Determined: How Burnt-Out Doctors Can Thrive in a Broken Medical System. Dr. Turner, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here.
Yeah. We ask everybody this question, and you're probably not prepared for that one, but what brings you joy in medicine today?
Ooh, what brings me joy in medicine? I think the thing that's always brought me the most joy is teaching. I love teaching residents and medical students. And so, I still get to do that. I'm still in academics. I still, get the joy of teaching every day. And so that's always brought me a lot of fulfillment, watching somebody go from, being, let's just say, a beginner at a procedure to being excellent by the end of their training, and or like watching them come up with a plan and helping them do that. That's always brought me a lot of joy.
Awesome. Yeah, that's been one of the answers that we've gotten from a lot of our guests that we've seen on the show. So I'm interested in your journey and how you got here talking about this topic. And also, piggybacking along this question, why do you think financial literacy is so overlooked in the training of healthcare providers? That's probably something that got you interested as well.
Yeah, sure. So I can talk about both those things. So the origin story dates way back to when I was a fourth year medical student. My wife and I, we had our first kid. She's now 13, and which is a little insane. But when we had Grace, we decided that we wanted to be a responsible adult to get term life insurance. We knew that, we needed to take care of each other or our baby if one of us died or both of us died.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know who to trust, and ended up having a medical school classmate. His brother was an insurance agent. So I was like, hey, look, it's a friend of mine. It's his brother. Certainly someone I can trust. And approached him about term life insurance. And long story short, he ended up talking me into applying for disability insurance. I have an essential tremor, a couple other medical diagnoses. And so I ended up getting denied when he put me through a fully underwritten process. And I would find out a year later that when I got to training, there was something called the Guaranteed Standard Issue Policy for disability, which basically stipulates we don't care what your medical history is so long as you haven't been denied and you haven't been disabled. So since I got denied as a fourth year med student who had no business applying for asset protection when I didn't have an income,
Right.
I to this day can't get disability insurance because the insurance agent didn't do the right thing for me. And so, it started with a distrust for the industry And this was really just well borne out thereafter. So like 6 months later, we had somebody come in and teach us, so our school was trying to be thoughtful about financial literacy, brought in a CEO of a financial firm. And I kid you not, 3 years into my residency, the CEO that was talking to us that day got thrown in jail for fraud. And so, it was like this rude awakening to, hey, here's money, which I knew nothing about. I grew up in a household that didn't really talk a lot about money, that, had a lot of credit card debt. And then my exposure to the financial industry was, this is just a bunch of people you can't trust. And so I ended up learning about it later on in my fellowship is when I started learning about personal finance. And as a teacher, the residents, the medical students, my colleagues wanted me to teach them about it once I started learning because I love teaching. So I love sharing things with people. And it kind of grew from there. I realized there was a need. I'm in academics. I love teaching. And so it just kind of naturally led to everything else that followed after that, the blog, the podcast, the books, and just, really a passion for teaching other people because I want people to know enough about money so that they don't get hosed like I did as a fourth year med student. So it's really about empowerment and protecting other people in the medical profession from the financial industry and giving them the empowerment to know enough to become financially independent and practice because they want to, not because they have to. So that's the origin stories. Your second question about financial literacy and why it's not talked about. Honestly, I think this answer is not as complicated as it might seem. At the end of the day, most doctors are financially illiterate. Really offensive, but definitely true. And so like having given talks all over the country and been in the space for 7 or 8 years, like when I go give talks, it's really hard for a doctor to define what a bond is or what a stock is or, what an index fund is. It's definitely harder for them to understand like, income-driven repayment plans and like long-term forgiveness versus short-term forgiveness. There's just a lot of complexity out there. And because of that, I think that doctors trust other people to handle their finances because they think it's too complicated. They think it's a topic that they can't learn a lot about. And so what that ends up with is a lot of administrators and leaders who make decisions about training programs who know nothing about money. And so their solution to that is, hey, let's go hire my financial girl or my financial guy, my financial advisor to come in and talk to our trainees, not knowing that person's probably not someone you can trust. And so, there's this just very, let's just call it, cautious approach to financial literacy because most of the people making the decisions, honestly, don't know a lot about money. So it makes it tough for them to find the right resources.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting to know. And I'm wondering what could be the impacts of not having enough financial literacy, because it's interesting you talked about disability insurance. I didn't know anything about it until I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease last year. And I'm like, oh, and now there's like the doors closed, right, to get disability insurance somewhat. So what do you think could be the impact of not knowing enough about these things?
Yeah, I think that's one of the best examples. And I'm sorry that happened to you. Coming from the crowd of people that can't get disability, I feel for you. But for trainees, like this is a great example. The guaranteed standard issue policy, which a lot of training programs have, doesn't care about your medical diagnosis. You can have an autoimmune disorder, you can have an essential tremor and, anxiety and the things that I had. They don't care. You will get a disability policy so long as you haven't gotten denied. And so the big asterisk there is that the GSI is only available during training. And so you can't be like, oh, I'm just going to get disability insurance when I'm 2 years into being an attending and I have more money. Like that's not a thing. That's not what actually happens. What happens is you lose access to the GSI, you get diagnosed with something and then you can't get it. And so, that's a showstopper when it comes to personal finance. Student loans is another example where it's just so complicated. People sometimes are like, just, bury their head in the sand and they're like, I'm just not going to learn about this because it's just so complicated and it's intimidating. And then they rack up a ton of debt that accrues, at 7% interest, and they're not doing anything about it. So there's definitely some profound impact on it. And obviously the most important part is if you don't have a glide path to financial independence, you end up practicing medicine because you have to, not because you want to. And that's not a place that any doctor wants to be. You want to be empowered to practice because you want to, not because you have it the other way around. And ultimately that's the biggest impact of no financial literacy is that you're stuck.
I feel it. You said the GSI, you can only get it as a trainee. So not if you're an independent practice, right?
Correct. You could still get disability insurance. You just can't get the GSI. So, the fully underwritten policy is fine. And it's a great thing to get. And honestly, if you can get it, you should probably do that. But if you can't, the GSI is the only other option, which is only available in training.
Trainees. Okay, perfect. Yeah, that's good. We'll note that down. Do you think talking about money, and I said that in the introduction, it's against, we don't learn about it because it's not, you're here to help people. This is a humane profession. Why are you talking about money? Why are you negotiating? At least I thought about it that way until I got ill. And now I'm like, oh, what if I can't earn in 10 years and I don't have the money to stop working, like you said? So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that altruism is something that's taken advantage of in all sorts of medicine. From this idea that you should be charting and doing your work at home or on weekends or on vacation to, we expect you to work regardless of what we're paying you, which by the way is ridiculous. If you went to the CEOs that, kind of perpetuated this thought, they're certainly not working for free. And most of the CEOs that I know are making 100x what I make. And so, it is insane to think that you should be working for free. And I would offer that people know this intrinsically, right? Like if I came to you and I said, hey, I want you to practice pediatrics and I'm going to pay you $10 for the year, you'd be like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm like, okay, what if I paid you 100? What if I paid you 1,000? What if I paid you 100,000? You keep going up. There's some number that becomes reasonable in your mind. And it is completely and totally arbitrary. So instead of using that, we could just use the market and what people are actually getting and have a sense for what your value is based on your specialty in your region and your kind of practice. And that should just be, looked at as a very objective, factual thing, right? If you're, making $200,000 for your specialty in your area, that's what you should probably get paid, right? And so but there is a lot of the money is taboo and money is not altruistic. And so you should just want to take good care of people. But at the end of the day, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take good care of people.
Yeah. I mean, I almost thought a few times before doing this podcast, because it's called Muted in Medicine. So we're talking about real topics in healthcare. And I was like, oh, we're talking about money. People are going to be like, hey, their problem is money, but it is a real problem, right? Like, because I mean, it's considered like medicine is a high paying profession. Like the general perception is that we're high paid professionals, but people don't realize what are the layers that go into it. And just talking about student loans and debts, do you have, if I would say, we talked a little bit, like 3 good advice for trainees if you're gonna, who's graduating, about money that they should make? And I know we talked about disability insurance.
Yeah, there are ultimately 3 tasks. One is disability insurance. The second is for the 80% of people listening that have student loans. You need a student loan plan, and you need to know on that topic. You need to know at least enough about it that you have a semblance of an idea of what you're doing. And so probably the biggest. I mean, there are lots of mistakes made in student loans, but one of the biggest is assuming that, hey, I'm not going into academics or a 501c3, and therefore I am not going to have public service loan forgiveness available. And as an example, 80% of hospitals are 501c3s. So if you're employed by a hospital, even if you're quote unquote in private practice, there's a good chance you still qualify. And the second is that even if you don't do that, say you're in a private practice group, there is something, there are opportunities for long-term forgiveness that you can get at 20 or 25 years. And so student loans is a huge area and one of the 3 areas that you need to really know about. And then the third is I would kind of capture in just general like financial literacy. Like you need to learn about just personal finance in general. Like you need to understand what stocks and bonds are, what investing is. And the reason why it's just a literacy kind of, standpoint in training is that you don't have enough money, most of them, to invest. And so you don't have enough money to probably go get a $5,000 will. Like you don't have enough money to do a lot of the things that you're going to be doing later, unless you're married to someone that also has a good income or you're independently wealthy. But you can learn about it so that when you do have those things, you don't buy the car, buy the house, buy the jet ski, put your kids in private school and do all of the things that then lead to you being house poor and living paycheck to paycheck despite earning a 6-figure salary. So you need to learn that stuff before that happens.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. I know you talked about academics, so I can see you care about money and you work in academics, kind of a
yeah, very much.
It's contrasting. So why do you think there's a significant difference in compensation between clinical and academic medicine? And I mean, I know there are some facts that go into it, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's multifactorial, right? So, payer mix is a huge issue. So I'm an anesthesiologist. And so, if you have a different payer mix, obviously you're going to have different reimbursement rates based on whether they're private practice or, they're Medicare or Medicaid, that sort of thing. And so that is one reason. Another is negotiated contract rates. And so if you're contract, rate for insurance companies is worse than other places, then you're going to make less money. The third thing is productivity, right? So in anesthesia, this is very easy to explain just because if I was in private practice, I'd be running 4 rooms at a time. In academics, I run 2 until, we hit the afternoon and people start going home, and then we pick up 4 rooms. And so you could surmise based on that, private practice doc's going to have twice as much productivity as an academic physician. And so for me in my specialty, it makes a little more sense. Now, as private equity and these big healthcare, acquisitions have taken place, that argument doesn't hold quite as much water. The reason being that a lot of academics are transitioning to a private practice kind of model. And so if you're working private practice and you have private practice productivity, you could argue that you should make private practice money. So the one other thing that probably goes into that equation, there are many, but one of them is academics, right? So you do have to pay for in a department that has a budget, right? You are going to be paying for some people that aren't clinical, that may be doing research or teaching, and that money comes into the department and all of it doesn't come back to you. Whereas in a private practice, you work, the practice makes money, you profit share, whatever it is, you got 20 partners, you divide it among 20, and that's how much money you get. And so, academics has some other, let's just say, things in the expense category that private practices don't.
Yeah. Why are you still in academics? I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, and I'm brutally transparent. So, this is fun. So, to be honest with you, I love teaching. But I also, there's no other place that I know of that would allow me to, in private practice, have the schedule that I have. So I am 85%, I'm 0.85 FTE.
Yeah.
I have a 10% reduction for the personal finance course that I teach for the 4th year med students. So I'm 75% clinical.
Yeah.
And what that means in my world at my department is that I work full time 10 weeks of the year. I'm on call 5 of those weeks. I do 5 weeks of second shift. And then the other 42 weeks of the year, I'm either completely off, like post-call vacation, or I work 2 days a week.
Okay.
And so 42 weeks of the year, I'm working 2 days a week max.
Yeah.
And I am 0.85 of an FTE. So anesthesia is a shift work specialty.
Yeah.
And so because of that, what that provides me is flexibility. Do I make less money than my private practice colleagues? 100%.
Yeah.
But I have a lot more flexibility, and we're recording the show at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. So this is how I can do these things.
Yeah. And I'm curious if you have any tips if people do not want to do full-time clinical work, or if they're thinking about doing something else and you look at the finances. Do you know of how they can, and it's like a broad question, but do you know how they can make it work for themselves? Or
Yeah, every specialty is different. And so some specialties it's a little more challenging to go part-time than others.
Yeah.
But in academics, it's all about buying down your time, right? So that might mean you get a FTE reduction for research or for teaching or for some committee that you're on or section head position. And then, otherwise, like for me, like I'm definitely taking a 15% pay cut to allow me to have the opportunity to have the schedule that I currently have. And so that can come from a variety of things, right? You could spend less money. You could save less money, right? You could get someone else to pay for part of your paycheck through an FTE reduction. How you get to those things is going to involve a lot of negotiation and conversations and kind of cultivating that skill of being able to get to what you want, which, negotiation in and of itself is probably a podcast episode worth recording.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you think the future of academics changing, like in terms of pay, or do you think anything that can be changed systematically that would change in the future? Or do you think the compensation is still going to be less in the long-term future?
I don't really see a future right now where academics are going to make the same amount of money as private practice, particularly private practices that have a good payer mix.
Yeah.
Academics, by part of their, calling or their mission, are going to provide more, services to people that are unable to afford healthcare. And so because of that, there's going to be less revenue coming into that hospital. You're going to make less money. Yeah. So, and you're also teaching. And so, you're probably not quite as productive as if you were doing things yourself, although they can sometimes extend your care and make that the opposite case. But I don't know. Right now, I don't really see that changing. Maybe that gap gets closer as academics become more private practice-like.
Yeah.
But I also live in the world of anesthesia. I don't know how it is in pediatrics.
I mean, and that's going to be my next question. Why do you think some specialties are less paid than others? But I mean, I think pediatrics is just, it's like on the bottom of the food chain, it's very less paid. And despite the work that we do every day, we think is pretty meaningful. And even like in academics and teaching residents. But yeah, does it come down to revenue as well? Like when some specialties are paid less? There was an article in the New York Times like a few months ago about how pediatrics is, such an important field and still so underpaid. So yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not in pediatrics, so I'd have to venture a guess here without wading into some very choppy waters. My suspicion is that the insurance that's used to pay for children's care reimburses substantially less than adult specialties.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be one of those specialties that's going to earn less money potentially because of that.
Yeah.
I think that's obviously challenging, right? Like, how do you fix insurance rates for children compared to adults,
Right.
when a substantial portion of them are under an insurance that is going to underpay?
Right.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know you mentioned negotiation, and I know that's a whole different topic, but how do healthcare providers negotiate about their salaries, or you talked about the clinical time, and does that also conflict with, the altruistic nature of the profession?
No, I don't think so. I am a firm believer that when you take care of yourself, you can take better care of other people. When I went to 2 or 3 days a week, like, I am not burned out in medicine anymore. I was very burned out in medicine when I was working 5 days a week. I mean, on antidepressants and the whole 9 yards. And so, no, I fundamentally think you need to take care of yourself, which is going to involve negotiation.
Yeah.
So how do you go about doing that? There are 2 books that I often recommend for people to read on this topic. One is Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. The other one's called Crucial Conversations. And if you kind of combine the topics, like from those, or the conversations from those 2 books, the topics that are discussed, really what you're going to find out is that negotiation is all about being very clear about what you want. And by that, I mean internally. Don't share what you want with other people. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, you need to know what you want going into a conversation.
Okay.
And then you need to focus on a couple of things. One is that you need to make sure that the person that you're having a conversation with feels safe that entire conversation. So if they start talking about, I come in and I say, hey, I want a 10% reduction for this personal finance course that I teach from medical school. That's going to be a certain kind of conversation. If I come in and say, hey, I've been asked to do this personal finance course for the medical school. It's the most popular elective that they don't even get credit for. It's not even called an elective. It's a certificate program for the medical school. 80% of the students sign up. I'm trying to figure out how to make the time for that. What I'm really saying is, like, here's my struggle. Here's my barrier. Here's the obstacle I need to overcome to accomplish this goal that we both agree is worthwhile, right? I'm making the department look good in the medical school. I'm helping the students. It's something I'm passionate about. And so when you point out problems to people, they're naturally going to become problem solvers. And so instead of saying no, or like making demands about what you want, just point out the problems and let people become problem solvers. And in the midst of that conversation, inevitably something's going to come up where it's going to be like, well, but Jimmy, like, we gave you 2%, for X, Y, and Z 3 years ago. And like, that has nothing to do with the current conversation. So what's really easy to do is to go back and say, well, yeah, but this 2% was because of, A, B, and C, and get sidetracked. And so you got to keep your eye on the goal. What is my goal? My goal here is getting a 10% reduction from a medical school course that I'm teaching. My second goal is to make sure that person on the other side of this table doesn't get angry. Like, I want them to feel like we're having a conversation. And I'm going to not get sidetracked on these other things that aren't what I'm trying to talk about right now. Who cares if they think the sky is green? I don't care. I'm not going to say it's blue. I'm going to focus on what I'm doing. But when you go to those conversations, if you point out, hey, this is the ask, this is what I'm looking for, these are the obstacles that I have, people are naturally turned into problem solvers, and they're going to want to help you. And so you say, hey, right now, say they email you and they're like, hey, we need you to be on this committee. You don't want to be on the committee. You could just say no, perfectly fine. And if you're in a place in your personal journey that you're able to do that, by all means, no is a complete sentence. It's a wonderful word. I support that. But some people are like, no, well, if I say no to this, like, they're going to get mad, or, and there's lots of coaching to be done there. But what you could also say is like, hey, well, I've got these 5 other things that I'm doing that you've asked me to do. Probably should list things that you also don't want to do. Which of these 5 things would you like me to give up so I can focus on that one thing you're asking me to do? You're putting them in a situation where they have to choose, right? And the inherent thought there is that if you can't give up one of these 4 or 5 things over here, I can't do the one that you're asking me to do. right? When you phrase things that way, people become a problem solver. And then they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. You are doing those 4 things. I can't really add this thing to you, can I? I'm like, yeah, no, I guess I can't do that right now, can I? And they're like, no. And neither person's mad. You got what you wanted. You walked away from the conversation achieving your goal. So asking questions, forming obstacles that need to be overcome and putting them in front of someone else to help you overcome them can be a really effective way to do that. Same thing with salary negotiations. So if you point out that someone else is making a different amount of money, hey, I talked to Susie and Susie's making, $10,000 more than I am. I'm just trying to figure out how I'm supposed to be okay with that. Right? Now they're in an awkward situation because it kind of makes them a jerk if they don't give you the $10,000 that Susie's making, or they have to explain to you why Susie is making that, right?
Yeah.
And have that uncomfortable conversation. So there are ways to get to your goal without saying, I need a $10,000 raise. I need to not be on that committee. I need this 10% FTE reduction. All of those conversations worded that way go over very, very poorly.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing advice, I think. And so thank you for sharing that. Because sometimes I think when you hear a no, it almost feels tough, like that you're not being valued or respected in the department. And have you ever felt that way that when you hear a no, or do you think we should not take it personally?
Oh, man. Yeah. This is going to, yeah. The answer is yes. So in my second book, I share this, so I'll share it publicly. I wanted to become an assistant program director early in my career. So
yeah.
I was, student body president in medical school, the chief resident, one of the best teachers in my department my first years in attending. Residents loved me. Like I was being groomed for this role. 3 APD positions open up. I don't get any of them. Fourth one opens up 2 years later. I didn't get that one either. And so, and there were, political reasons behind the scene for why that happened, things that I couldn't control. Yeah. And absolutely, it made me feel undervalued and unappreciated. And in fact, that's one of the reasons why I went and started my business. Like it was already there in the background anonymously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went and found my value somewhere else because I wasn't finding it at the time in my institution. I felt completely unappreciated, and no one could give me a reason why, which was the best part, right? Like, hey, these are all the things that I've done. Like, is there something I could be doing better? Like, I had those conversations because I'm never going to assume that I'm the best candidate. I'm never going to assume that there's not something I could do better. So approach them, and basically I told them, no, you're doing great. We just didn't choose you. So it was an awkward conversation. 8 years down the road, it all worked out great. And actually, I'm in a much better position than I would have been having taken that trajectory. But at the time, man, like that, it was honestly soul crushing. Like that's what I wanted to do with my career.
Yeah. And you said that drove you to doing your own thing because you realized you were not getting that value.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's a big mistake, right? So you need 3 things, right? So I borrow this all the time from Jordan Grummett, who runs Doc G or Diversify, Earned and Invest podcast. Wrote a book called Taking Stock, and he's a hospice and palliative care physician. Great guy. You should have him on the show. Has another book coming out. And so Jordan, he basically boils it down into purpose, connection, and identity, right? Yeah. So those are the 3 things you need to be like happy in life. You need to know who you are, you need to be connected to other people in your community, and you need to have purpose. And so when that happened to me, I didn't feel like it felt like my purpose was being taken to some extent. I didn't have control over my career. And so like my autonomy was a bit under attack. And so the only way I knew how to solve that at the time was to go and create it on my own, create my own purpose, create my own autonomy, which I did. But I'm not going to pretend that for 2 years I wasn't like really, really angry about it and burned out and, all of the things, because I definitely was.
Yeah. Do you feel successful in what you're doing right now? Like what the path that you've taken and your podcast and books, and does the output matter at this point, or just doing it matters? Like, do you feel good about it?
So for me, it's much more about helping people. Yeah. And so long as I'm helping people, which I predominantly do through financial literacy, I love doing that. I love content creation. I create a podcast. I edit it myself. Really enjoy doing that for now. Yeah. And so, that provides me some purpose. And it took me a long time to get through like the existential crisis of like, what am I doing with my life? Right. Yeah. Like if this APD thing didn't pan out and academics, maybe I wasn't going to go the direction I thought I was going to go. Like what is this thing called life? What am I doing? And it took me a long time to realize like, you don't have to cure cancer. Like you don't have to be like solving world peace. Like it's okay to have a purpose that is smaller than that. Let's just say. And so for me, absolutely. And I think it's, equally important to mention on that though, because externally, somebody can look very, very successful.
Yeah.
Right. And in the online entrepreneurship world, like this gets talked about all the time. People are like, oh yeah, how much revenue does your business make? But we don't spend enough time talking about profit, right? So you can have $1 million business and have $1 million in expenses and make $0 running a $1 million business. And so like for me, like it is much more important to talk about the impact than the thousands of,
Money.
email subscribers or listeners or what have you. Like I don't get stuck in metrics anymore. Like I really just want to help people.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing that, absolutely, I feel successful. I feel fulfilled. I'm accomplishing important things to me.
Yeah, no, I think you're doing great. I came across you online and I really loved the work you were doing. So
Thanks.
I think you are. Just switching gears a little bit. So do you think, and I don't know if you're an expert on that, there's still some gender bias that exists in pay in medicine? I kind of had an argument with my husband. He's also a physician. And he's like, no, it doesn't exist still. So, I mean, me being a female, I think it still exists. So what do you think?
I would make two comments. I know historically in my department it has, and then it was found out, and now it no longer does.
Okay.
And so, and that was probably, I mean, a solid like 15 years ago or so. So I know in my particular department, no, like that's not at all the case. However, I also have a lot of friends that are women physicians who notice discrepancies and see issues in pay where they work. I've talked to people about their specific situations where that is true. And so for me, like I absolutely do think it still exists. In my, optimist half full perspective, I'd like to think it's getting better, but I don't know the data. I don't know what that shows. I do know that for some people it still happens, and it's an important conversation to have.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice do you give to physicians who are out of residency, who are practicing about finances, if you were to give any advice today?
So the first thing I would say is to learn enough. I break people up into three groups, right? When it comes to personal finance. So you've got the do-it-yourself people. They're going to handle all of their personal finance tasks on their own. They're not going to have a financial advisor, and they're just going to invest on their own, right? They're probably going to use a broadly low-cost diversified index fund strategy because that's what the literature shows you should do. And that's it. Like they're going to make it as simple as possible and do everything themselves because they learn enough. That's a small group of doctors. Most doctors don't just do everything themselves.
Yeah.
The second group is like the dot the I's, cross the T's. This is the group that knows a lot about personal finance, or definitely enough, but they want a professional to dot the I's and cross the T's, make sure they're not doing anything stupid. This is a large group of people. The largest group of people, however, still, in my opinion, in medicine, are the outsource group where they're like, I don't know barely anything about money. Like I just know my financial advisor who I pay unknown amounts of money.
Right.
Does everything for me and they outsource it. I think everybody should be in group 1 and group 2. Unfortunately, there's a large majority that are in group 3.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge disservice. And the reason why is because the people that are in group 3 are the most likely to be taken advantage of because they know the least and they're most likely to work with advisors that are going to be working in models that don't help, like aren't helpful for them, right? They're going to be getting sold whole life insurance products while they think the person's a financial planner or a financial advisor, and they're really just an insurance agent or broker selling you products, right? If you're a person selling you whole life insurance and that's one of the first conversations you had with them, like you should run. And in order to know that, you have to know enough about personal finance to realize that whole life, for example, is wrong for 99% of people. And yet it gets pitched to 99% of doctors. And so I think that knowing enough is a big, big part of it. The second piece that I would attach to that is it doesn't have to be hard, right? If you can learn medicine, you can learn money. Medicine is infinitely more complicated, right? So there are boxes you have to check. You got to get life insurance if you got somebody dependent upon your income. You need term life insurance. You need to get own occupation disability insurance. You need to have a student loan plan, right? You can get both of those, all three of those things by working one time with somebody that you can trust. You need to know about investing, right? Which means low cost diversified index funds. I just saved you reading 500 books. That's going to be the answer when you get to the end of your road. And you need to decide, how much is in stocks and how much is in bonds. Like there's certain things that literally reading a book or two would help you figure out. It's one of the reasons why I wrote my book is so that you don't have to go find all that information. But like, you don't have to be a do-it-yourselfer. You can find a financial advisor, which brings us to like the third thing. If you're going to get help, you need to understand how people get paid. Like you should look the person in the eye and say, how do you make money? And they're going to be like, oh, well, I just, they're just going to not answer the questions what they're going to do. And so, classic example, large mutual fund company that targets physicians. you'll ask them like, well, how do you make money? And they're like, oh no, the financial advice is free. And you're like, really? Like, how is that possible? And they're like, yeah, it's just, something that kind of comes along with our services. What they're not telling you is that that $20,000 whole life insurance policy that you just purchased is actually how they got paid, and how they're going to continue to get paid off of trails every year after that. And so you need to understand that the way people get paid dictates the advice that they give you. So if you're paying them money to buy an insurance product, they're going to earn a commission. They are incentivized to sell you said product. If they make money from an assets under management model where they take a percentage of your assets that they manage, their incentive is to put more money into that pool. So when you say, hey, should I pay off my mortgage earlier? Should I pay off my student loans? Or should I pay off this credit card debt? They could say no. And the reason why is because they want you to put more money into the taxable brokerage account that they manage. So you need to know enough. You can do it on your own. If you need help, you just really need to understand how these people get paid. Avoid financial advisors that sell products. That's called fee only, when they only provide financial advice. And so, that if you're not going to be in that do-it-yourself group, getting help from someone you can actually trust, I think, is paramount.
Doctors are like, most of doctors are so busy with their time. I'm just curious, is that really such a bad thing to outsource? Do you think so? Like going to someone, or is there a better way to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge believer in spending money to outsource things. Like, I don't mow my lawn. I mean, there's lots of things that I don't do, that I think some people would look at and be like, that's a crazy amount of money that you're spending to not do that. And so I've got no problem with that, but it needs to be for a fair price, and you need to be getting it from somebody that's actually doing what's right for you. So unfortunately, just because someone's a CFP, just because they tell you that they're a fiduciary, doesn't mean that they're actually going to do the right thing for you. And so absolutely, you can outsource some stuff to your financial advisor. I think there are good financial advisors out there. I think that they are rare. So if you're going to do that, it's you really just need to do your due diligence, but there's nothing wrong with that. Although I would say that if you're going to do simple style investing, you probably don't need one, right? Just like check all the boxes. And then, low cost diversified index funds, you probably don't need an advisor, to like ongoing.
Yeah, that makes sense. You probably talk about this in your book you said you talk about in the book about how the ways of investment are in stocks and bonds and funds. Do you? Yeah.
No, we talk about that. And, because, ultimately everything in personal finance comes back to like, what is your end? What is your why? To the quote behind you on the wall there. You need to know why you started, right? So if you're going to start investing, the why is you're trying to retire by a certain age.
Yes.
And so you need to figure out, I want to be financially independent by the age of 55. Okay, great. How much money do you want to spend in retirement? I want to spend $10,000 a month. Okay, you need 120 grand a year. Multiply that by 25. Now we know this is how much you need to have in order to be financially independent if you retire at 55 or 60. But it all starts from like, what do you want? Like, what do you want out of this crazy thing called life? Because I save infinitely less money now so that I can spend more money. And I'm going to retire at a later age because of that. But I'm okay with that. And so, but yeah, you have to start with the end in mind.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about retirement too. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But and you maybe talk about it in your book, what are some of the steps we can take towards like a safe retirement for doctors?
So if you start out with the age, and I actually have an entire YouTube video on this, like how much do I need to save for retirement each year? And it walks you through like that backwards method of figuring out, okay, I need this amount of money by this age, and therefore I need to save, $100,000. I need to save $40,000, whatever that number ends up being. Obviously, the sooner that you want to retire, the more money you need to save. Also, the less money you spend, the less money you need to save. Right. So if you wanted to live on $60,000 a year, most doctors are going to be able to save enough money to retire very quickly. 5-10 years. Now, if you want to live on 200 grand a year, you're going to have to save a lot of money. You know? And you're going to need a longer time to get there. But I think it's important to figure out what it is, what that number is each year, and then to automate it. You need to automate your investing so that it happens before you ever see it. It comes out of your paycheck. You pay yourself first, as they say. And then, you are able to achieve your financial goals on autopilot. And the reason that's important is because you're human. And if it's complicated, or you check your stocks every day and you see the market go down, you will change what you're doing. It's called myopic loss aversion. When you pay more attention to your investment portfolio, you're more likely to see it go down, and therefore you're more likely to sell, which is a catastrophic financial mistake on par with like getting divorced. You lose half. In that situation, you might lose 20% or 30%. And so, you need to automate your finances after you figure out what that number is you need to save each year. And then you fill up the buckets that you have, right? So if you got a 403B and an HSA and a backdoor Roth IRA, and you fill all those up and those are your tax advantage space, well, now you have a taxable brokerage account that's left. So you fill up all of your tax advantage space with a number that you've determined.
Yeah.
And then what's left goes into a taxable brokerage account.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. What are you teaching? I'm curious about your course that you're doing at the med school, and do you think it has made an impact and it is appreciated by the students, or do they like it?
Yeah, no, it's been, it's been an absolute joy for me to teach. And part of the reason why is because the students love it. I get emails from my students from 1, 2, 3, 4 years ago. Hey, Jimmy, like I remember this one lecture that you talked about X, Y, and Z. And so I just wanted to ask you a question about this, or I just wanted to let you know that, I found a good financial advisor, or, I got my disability insurance that I knew I was supposed to get. And hey, that one thing that you taught me saved me from doing this mistake. And so it's been really, really great. 100% of the students have recommended it to the next year's class. And the feedback that they leave at the end of the course, I can just go back to that document like every month or so if I'm having a bad day and just like read that and be like, okay, I am doing good things. So it's definitely well received. And honestly, I think financial literacy should be part of every single medical school, every single residency and fellowship program. If you don't have that, I highly encourage you to consider reaching out to have someone help you with that. Again, making sure it's the right person. But it's been really, really helpful. The topics we cover, we've mentioned a lot already on the show, which is student loans. We do two lectures on that. It's a 10-week curriculum, so we do 10 lectures. I give them all my book for some reading beforehand. We do 2 on investing. We do 2 on student loans. We do 1 on asset protection. We do 1 on budgeting. We do 1 on working with the financial industry. I think we do, some years we've done a panel with other attending physicians just to kind of give their perspective from different specialties. So we bring, me from anesthesia, and we have a family practice physician. Might have an emergency medicine physician, a surgeon, to give some, different perspectives on things. So it's something we change each year based on the feedback from the students and what they need and what they need, what they think they need, which are not often the same thing.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Yeah. Do you do it for the residents too, or no? You're planning to?
So this goes back to earlier conversation. So back when I wanted to do it originally, I wanted to do it for residents, and I got told no.
Yeah. Okay.
It goes back to money being taboo, that sort of stuff. And this is hilarious. So I had one person tell me like, we just can't do that. It's just not something we can teach the residents. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, if we teach them the wrong thing to do with their money, like that would be like really catastrophic for them, and we don't want to take that risk. And I'm like, so maybe I'm a bit jaded because I'm an anesthesiologist, but when I train somebody to do something and they do it wrong, people die.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, so you're concerned about me teaching them about index funds, which like academically have been studied and how they are better than the actively managed mutual funds that your financial advisor has you in.
Yeah.
And you don't want me to teach that to them because they might invest in the wrong thing. But we can teach them about saving people's lives and helping them not die.
Yeah.
And so it's just like this, but back then that's how it was, 8 years ago, like people just, you want to talk about money, they thought you were, had 4 heads. And so there was some resistance to it. So I stepped into medical school, and it's one of probably only a handful of curriculums in the entire country. In fact, I only know of like 2 or 3 others.
Very nice.
That exist. And so, but I created a video curriculum, and part of what I'm going to be doing in the next 12 months is reaching out to programs and saying, hey, it's all free. Like you get the video curriculum. There's a book on there. You can get that for free. I'm happy to crunch numbers for student loan analysis. I won't have like a one-on-one consult with you, but I'll crunch your numbers and send them to you. And provide that as a free resource for people.
Very nice.
And so, that's something that's in the works at the moment.
Yeah. Did you plan ever to take your training somewhere else, like the in-person training to other institutions, or no? Or do you do that?
So I've been asked to come and speak.
Yeah.
A lot of places.
Yeah.
And so I don't do as much of that as I had in the past. Obviously the pandemic changed things a lot. So a lot of it went virtual.
Okay.
I still do virtual talks, which I really enjoy giving.
Awesome.
And my thought on the curriculum is, providing access broadly to a lot of people, as opposed to having to go talk to every single individual program, which is very challenging in terms of time.
Sure. Yeah. I think we're almost going towards the end. You mentioned something, and I hadn't prepared that question, but about asset protection, because I know there's high risk field, litigation, and some of the fields are very high risk. So is there any top tips that you have in terms of asset protection? And what are some of the mistakes that people commonly make as well?
The biggest mistake that people make outside of life insurance and disability insurance is not having their tail covered for malpractice insurance. And this becomes a really big problem, particularly if you're like a OBGYN in Florida. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like $100,000 mistake. So when you sign a contract, first of all, you should have your contract reviewed by a contract attorney who can help you with this stuff. But you need to ask about tail insurance, and they can do lots of different things with that. They can say, hey, we really need you and your specialty at our hospital. We'll completely cover your tail. So when you leave, you don't have to worry about it. We'll cover those premiums. Some people say, well, you're an OBGYN and you work in Florida and that's $100,000 you're asking for. And so they might say, well, we'll cover your tail, but we're going to prorate it over 4 years. So every year we'll cover 25 grand. If you stay for 4 years, we'll cover the whole thing if you leave. And so it's kind of like a vesting schedule for a 401k or a 403b. But it is a really big problem.
Yeah.
If you need to leave your current employer and you don't have tail insurance for malpractice, it can cause bad problems. In fact, I've seen one couple that I've coached in the past. They stayed at a job because they couldn't sell their house. First of all, you need enough money to sell your house. By the way, if you have a house, you should have 8% in equity, some way, shape, or form, or cash on hand to sell that house.
Yeah.
So they were trapped by their house, but they were also trapped because they were both proceduralists and neither of them had their tail covered. And so they had to commute I don't even remember, an hour and a half one way to go to work at this new place to basically transition because they couldn't sell their house and malpractice was super expensive. So financially, they just couldn't afford to leave, even though they both needed to for family reasons. There's a reason to be in the other city.
Yeah.
So disability insurance, huge area of mistakes. Life insurance, just don't get whole life. Just get term life insurance. That's pretty easy. But then asset protection, please, please, please ask about your tail and whether it's covered.
Yeah. Can you, when you're deciding to quit, you can't request for that, right? If you're deciding to move on, can you request for that or no?
It depends on what we're talking about, right? I mean, if you're getting a severance, and there's some negotiation power that you have at the table, potentially, but you really want to settle most of those things before you sign your contract.
Yeah.
Unless there's a reason for you to have leverage in that conversation. So you need to discuss your non-compete before you sign a contract. You need to make sure it's something you're okay with and actually request changes if it's not. You need to check for your tail insurance beforehand. Those are all things that you need to deal with on the front end, unfortunately. And a lot of people find that out the hard way.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything that we haven't talked about? I would want to say I was going towards the end.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground and it was fun having the conversation. Obviously there's a ton to cover when it comes to personal finance. So, have an entire show on Money Meets Medicine about that every week because it's so many things to talk about.
Yeah, and I'll go subscribe to that and, I'll put the link for your books on the show notes as well. Great. But yeah, this was, really amazing, really educational for me because I'm not I don't have a lot of financial literacy too, but it's just fun to learn more from you.
Yeah. Well, always happy to help if you have questions.
Yeah. I end my podcast with a small poem. So if you'll just stay with me for that, it's just a few seconds and then we'll go towards the end. So as we wrap up the episode on financial literacy, I wanted to share a few lines from Wendell Berry's poem, The Piece of Wild Things. And he reflects on finding solace in nature when the burdens of life feel overwhelming. So when despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. Thank you so much for doing this with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that with me.